Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. How are you doing? Welcome to the stream. It's going to be a short stream today. Reason being, I have somewhere I have to be in less than an hour. And I'm not preaching this upcoming Sunday. So I'm going to be taking a trip with some prospective elders, and we're going to be just doing some team building and, getting a better understanding of what plurality of elders looks like. And so I'm not going to be preaching. So I actually don't even have a sermon to prep. And I have thought about not streaming at all, but I do have a lesson that I need to teach tomorrow on Strange New World, Trueman, Chapter 7. And so I figured, you know what? Why not fire the stream up? Maybe I can answer some questions. We can have a little bit of conversation while I do my preparation for that study. So this is going to be a boring stream. I'm just going to be reading. I might read out loud a little bit here and there. But if you guys ask questions, want to have conversation, etc., that might make it a little more interesting, a little more spicy, right? So anyway, like I said, short stream, not going to be super long today because I have to be somewhere in a bit. But let's get going. So I've been teaching through Trueman, and we're on 7, which is getting pretty close to the end of the book. I think there's only like 3 chapters beyond this. Yeah, 7, 8, 9. So 2 more chapters beyond this one. And it's been a good book. What I typically do is I read through and I just highlight anything that's of interest to me. And then I kind of pull my highlights together, and that usually sparks some thoughts on different, larger, broader based topics that I might want to treat. And that's how I often go about it, right? So it's been an interesting study, and I think you'd be benefited from this book or his other book if you haven't read either of them on this topic. So helpful, I think, for today's conversations. Says the letters LGBTQ plus loom large in the cultural and political imagination of our day. The coalition of lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer people is without a doubt the greatest political success story of the last half century. In the 1960s, homosexuality was still illegal in many Western countries. I did not know that. Even Barack Obama did not dare support gay marriage unequivocally until 2012. Yet today, even to voice dissent from trans ideology is likely to earn one a ferocious social media beating and exclusion from polite liberal society. The speed, depth, and comprehensive scope of the LGBTQ plus's triumphant cultural conquest is impressive. Yet familiarity with the coalition can easily blind observers to its confected and volatile nature. It is not a movement bound together by a set of intrinsic commonalities shared by its constituent groups, as, say, the Republican or Democratic Party are. Rather, it is a marriage of convenience created by uniquely particular circumstances. Exploring this point is helpful because it not only helps us to understand the nature of the sexual revolution that we are witnessing today, it also helps us to see what is exactly at stake in all this in terms of where the revolution itself might be heading and how this will reshape public attitudes toward traditional freedoms such as those of speech and religion. And what I think he's going to get at is, in some ways, the acronyms end up working against each other. So I think J.K. Rowling is pretty famous for, in her feminist stance, opposing a lot of trans ideology. And so she gets called out, even though she is pretty left-leaning in many ways. She gets called out for that. So it's just very interesting dynamic on the LGBTQ plus, right? Some of these letters of this acronym, they kind of work against each other, right? Steve Cabral, my man, what is up? Good to see you. Yeah, how are you? Thanks for swinging by. Hope you're doing well. Welcome. What is up, Frankel? Good to see you. Thanks for being here. So I think that's where he's going to go, but something like this, I think, is a good quote. But we'll kind of see as we progress. It says the first thing to note about the LGBTQ plus is that its different constituent members are actually divided over the very thing upon which an outsider might assume they are agreed, the nature and status of sex. Consider the first of the L and the G. Until early 1980s, lesbians and gay men did not operate as a united coalition. Lesbians saw gay men as enjoying male privilege. For example, a gay man in the workplace was typically not under any pressure to make himself attractive to a female boss in order to improve his professional prospects. Lesbian woman, however, might well find that she was required to play a distinctly feminine, even sexually attractive role in a heterosexual context for career success. In short, gay men were still men and enjoyed the benefits of living in a society that gave an advantageous position to their sex. There were also differences in attitudes towards sexual activity itself. Gay men were more focused on genital sex and on orgasms, lesbians toward affection and companionship. All right, so probably need to highlight this male privilege piece, right? So what brought the L and the G together? Put simply, the AIDS crisis of the 1980s. AIDS had a disproportionate and devastating impact on gay men and transformed their image overnight from that of privileged middle-class males engaged in self-indulgence to that of tragic victims of a deadly and at that point uncontrollable disease that was closely connected to their sexual identity. Therefore, in the early 1980s, an interesting and public coalition of the L and G emerged, focused on presenting a united front in the campaign for AIDS research, sex education, and mainstream acceptance of gay and lesbian people by the wider community. I don't know about this one. You guys think he's correct here? I guess I don't remember it much. I was relatively young. But right here, transform their image to tragic victims. 3 things are noteworthy. First, the coalition arose out of a shared sense of victimhood, as lesbians saw themselves as victims of a heteronormative patriarchal society, so they now saw gay men as victims of the same. This is in part a function of the broader cultural expressive individualism that tilts toward seeing as virtuous victims those unable to express outwardly that which they feel inwardly. Second, both lesbians and gays and bisexuals assume the importance of biological sex differences. This is where the trans issues come into play. Third, standing in significant tension with the second point, in allying themselves with gay men, lesbians set aside the importance of biology with its significance for how different sexes experience the world in order to present a common front against a common enemy, heteronormative society. Interesting. Yeah, and here's where the trans ideology comes in. Okay. The origins of trans ideology arguably go back to the 19th century. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels noted that as production came to be increasingly automated and as raw physical strength therefore became less significant in the workplace, the difference between men and women would shrink. Of course, they were not envisaging a world where Caitlyn Jenner would be possible, but the link to technology is important. He's brought this up before with the
your life is not in your hands. Your life is in the hands of God.
Hold on a tick.
Giovanna Blitz just resubbed for 2 months.
Yes. Much love. Thank you, Giovanna. Appreciate that. Thanks for the prime sub. Hello, how are you? Good to see you. Thanks for swinging by. Hope you're doing well. Yeah, appreciate you. He's brought this technology aspect up before because he tied it to birth control. And he said birth control was a major development as well that pushed forward the more feminist movement. We might also know that Nietzsche's anti-metaphysical philosophy, with its stress on how we ourselves have a godlike power to create truth, also lends itself to the repudiation of stable categories such as male and female. Both Marx and Nietzsche proved important in the rise of gender theory. In the context of this book's narrative, we might also add that the psychologizing of the self that we've described also opens possibilities for trans ideology. This essentially grants the givenness of the physical body less authority than the mind in determining identity. Indeed, the body is an instrument or the raw material for realizing or expressing identity as determined by the will. That's interesting. Glad you're doing okay, Giovanni. Good to see you. Of more immediate significance to our current situation, however, is the thought of Simone de Beauvoir. Totally butchered that, I know. I don't speak French. The French philosopher whose 1949 book, The Second Sex, is a foundational text for modern feminist theory. She opens the second part of that work with a dramatic and far-reaching statement. One is not born, but rather becomes woman. No biological, psychic, or economic destiny defines the figure that the human female takes on in society. It is civilization as a whole that elaborates this intermediary product between the male and the eunuch that is called feminine. Wow. Yeah, that's going to be what we're talking about in our study. This captures the remarkably concise form, the fundamental convictions that underlie the modern trans movement. De Beauvoir makes a distinction between biology and what we now call gender, right? So it's the whole gender-sex dynamic, right? The whole idea of what it is to be a woman is a social construct, something that is not intrinsic to the female body. To use the language of later gender theory, Judith Butler, gender is a performance. a set of behaviors that society has come to expect from those who possess a certain kind of body. In so doing, a separation is made between sex, which is biologically determined, and gender, socially constructed. Well, there we go. Such that the latter floats free of any biological determination, can be made and remade at will. One is born biologically female, one becomes a woman by learning the performances required by society. Cal Magic, what is up? Frank Turek's correct, not politically correct, has some interesting thoughts on this subject from a biblical perspective. Thank you. Appreciate you, Cal Magic. Hope you're doing well. Thanks for swinging by. Arsenal, so I can't be a giraffe. You biologically can't be a giraffe, Arsenal. But let's all remember, one's giraffeness is a socially constructed phenomenon. So you can socially be a giraffe. Yes, you've got it. You just have to perform. You have to learn the performances required by a giraffe in society and then act them out. Presumably eat leaves off of tall trees. I don't know other things that giraffes do, but you got it. Yeah, there you go. It is true that this notion contains elements of truth. Anyone who has experience of different cultures knows that the roles of men and women vary across the globe. The American ideal of masculinity is different from that which one finds in England or South Korea. The same goes for women. A woman in Cairo will conform to a set of cultural expectations different from those in Manhattan or Tokyo. It is therefore a relatively easy task to point out that such things as masculinity or femininity contain a large element of social construction, whereby males and females internalize the behavioral expectations of the wider host culture. Cabral, interesting note on how technological advancement lends itself to this ideology, given the implicit call towards technical advancement between the lines of the Dominion Mandate. Yes, that is very interesting, and it also reminds me of Neil Postman, because Neil Postman is pretty strongly opposed to certain technological advancements. Maybe I'm spelling it wrong. Anyway, and that's something that's not going away, right? With AI issues and other things like that, the automation of technology or of manufacturing, machining, different things like that. Correct. It seems that the cultural mandate, Dominion Mandate, would want to push us to continue to lean into such technologies, and yet sometimes we are not prepared for their unintended consequences of said technologies. For what it's worth, my personal opinion is we need to continue to move forward with technology and learn how to use it well. I feel like technology is a tool and is not bad or evil in and of itself, but our sin nature can make it bad or evil, and so we've got to be aware of that. That's my own personal take. Yes. To move from this rather obvious reality to the notion that sex and gender are separable and that the latter is simply a performance and dramatic metaphysical leap is a dramatic metaphysical leap, the plausibility of which depends on a number of other prior factors. First, inner psychology must have been granted ultimate authority in human identity. Second, technology needs to have rendered the possibility of changing gender to be something that is technically plausible. Finally, the idea needed a powerful lobby group and an attractive media presence in order to help normalize the idea. The former came from its engrafting in the LGBT movement, the latter in the person of Bruce, now Caitlyn Jenner. I was listening to somebody recently. I think it was Andrew Klavan from the Daily Wire. I think so. And he talked about how the trans issue would be one thing if we could create a machine where you could literally step inside, press a button, and truly become the opposite gender, right? That he said that wouldn't answer the moral question of whether or not it was okay, but it would change the question. The question would be different than it is right now. But given our current technology, it's a different question entirely regarding gender reassignment surgeries and different things like that, right? And I think he has a point. The things that we try to do right now to change somebody's gender are vastly different than a magic machine that you go into and you press a button and it just transforms you into the other sex or the other gender. The narrative of this book has traced the psychologizing of identity from Rousseau onward. Technology has played its role in facilitating the trans movement on two fronts. It has generally encouraged people to view nature as mere raw material that can be changed by acts of human will, and it has allowed for bodily and hormonal manipulation so as to create the idea that gender can be altered. So I think not only do gender and sex need to be talked about, but technology needs to be talked about as well. Cal Magic says, why would Reformed epistemology be considered alongside other traditional categories of apologetics like classical and presuppositional? Reading a book on cultural apologetics, and that is how the author parses apologetics. So Reformed epistemology apologetics is popularized primarily by Alvin Plantinga, I'm pretty sure. Let's see. Alvin Plantinga has come up with Reformed epistemology apologetics, and my understanding is that he says belief in God is properly basic. Belief in God is properly basic, and you don't have to justify it, is how I understand Plantinga. And it's a different way of arguing, right? It's even different than presuppositionalism. Now, a lot of Reformed people tend to be presuppositionalist in their apologetic approach, but that's different than Reformed epistemology. Now, don't get me wrong; they are good friends, Reformed epistemology, apologetics, and presuppositionalism, but they have some significant differences. Reformed epistemology apologetics almost tends into fideism. No, spelled it wrong. Fideism. But not quite, right? They're a little bit different. Let's see. Reformed epistemology, apologetics, and fideism. Basically, he creates this category called warrant, right? Like if you think about, here, let's go over here. I'm interested to talk about this because it's part of my current studies. So, this is my understanding, but I'm decently read on the topic, okay? So I should roughly know what I'm talking about here. My understanding is that Plantinga wants to argue that belief in God is a properly basic belief that doesn't need to be justified in the sense that we often justify other beliefs, right? So, somebody asks us, if the sky's blue, we say yes. They say why, justify. And so then you might come up with some sort of scientific explanation on why the sky is blue and how your eyes can be used to perceive the sky, etc. And so that justification aspect has traditionally in the West been an important part of knowledge. How do you gain knowledge? Knowledge in the West, the standard definition is justified true belief. You need three components: justified true belief, right? So justification has to do with the argumentation you use to support a piece of knowledge. True is, I think we know that one, true or false, right? You can't have knowledge of something that's false in the sense that I'm talking about now. Obviously, you can know something is not true, but you can't say, I know that the sky is purple when it's blue, because that you can't say you have that knowledge because it's not true. So justified true and then belief, right? You believe it to be the case. And so that's typically the Western definition of knowledge. Knowledge is justified true belief. Now, I personally take issue with that definition myself, but let's go with it. What Plantinga does, as far as I understand, is he creates a different category, and he is using it to fill in for justification. He creates a category he calls warrant. All right, warrant. And so Plantinga is not so concerned about the justified part, right? When he argues that certain beliefs are properly basic, he's basically trying to say he doesn't need to justify them. But instead, he asks the question, are these beliefs warranted? Okay? Are these beliefs warranted? And if these beliefs are warranted, then they constitute knowledge, even if they cannot be justified. And I think part of his point is that we know some things that we can't justify, right? And so he comes up with this concept called warrant in order to cover that. And so Plantinga has a trilogy. I have all three books. I haven't read them, but they're called warrant and proper belief and different things like that, right? And so that's Plantinga's works. And Plantinga is essentially the founder of Reformed epistemology apologetics as such. And so some have gone along with him on this, but it's important to note that Reformed epistemology apologetics is not the same as presuppositionalism. Presuppositionalism is Van Til, it's Greg Bahnsen, and also others like Clark, and there are a handful of other presuppositionalists that, kind of argued about all those things. Plantinga comes later, and he comes up with Reformed epistemology apologetics. So hopefully that helps. Really good question. Appreciate that, Cal Magic. Maybe self-evident is a better phrase than warrant, perhaps. But again, Plantinga, he kind of hangs his hat on warrant and makes that a big part of his system. All right, Reformed epistemologetics and fideism. Reformed epistemology, a concept popularized by Christian philosopher Alvin Plantinga, proposes that belief in God can be properly basic and warranted without the need for direct first-person access to justifying reasons. Like, man, I did a pretty good job. This approach differs from traditional evidentialist apologetics, which emphasizes the importance of being aware of good reasons that justify one's belief. Reformed epistemology is not synonymous with fideism, despite common misconceptions. While fideism advocates believing without reasons or in spite of contrary evidence, Reformed epistemology argues that Christian belief can be warranted even if the believer cannot articulate specific reasons for their faith. I did a pretty good summary. Come on, guys. I'm almost as good as the AI on this one topic. This perspective suggests that justified knowledge may come from human intellectual abilities functioning according to their intended design, implying a theistic origin. So, and that's a bit like inference to the best explanation, which is much more aligned with my epistemology. Critics have argued that this approach might lead to circular reasoning, but proponents contend that it seeks to demonstrate that Christian theism is necessary for all meaning and argument to be possible. Reformed epistemology also differs from presuppositional apologetics in its less strident view of the divide between believers and non-believers in its stance on the possibility of rational discussion without theistic assumptions. So there you go. Pretty good little description here. Almost as good as mine. I'm just kidding, guys. Oh, man. All right. The problem of the T. Let's go to the problem of the T. The problem of Pastor T. What? Oh, I was like, what happened here? I changed to an old note document is what happened there. Okay, we're back. The addition of the T to LGB is, in a very real sense, incoherent. As we noted earlier, lesbians, gay men, and bisexuals all assume the sex binary of male and female as grounded in basic biology. That point is denied by trans ideology, affirming as it does the separability of biological sex from gender. And again, I think this is why J.K. Rowling, for example, has a big problem. She sees very clearly that in spite of all of the progressive leanings you might want to have, there is something about the trans movement that is implicitly, at least, opposed to her feminist ideology, right? Does scientific theology distance itself from Meeks or pull alongside? These are all on my reading list. They're similar, but I get the impression Meek is unaware of critical realism. Let me pull this up. Just so you guys know what Cal Magic is talking about. Cal Magic, speaking my language, because this is the subject of my PhD. Alistair McGrath, Scientific Theology, okay? Volume 2 is the most important. This is Volume 1. Volume 2, Reality, okay? Now, here's the interesting thing. I've read this to you guys before. Oh, this is... Just the preface is so good. If you, Cal Magic, if you're interested in more reading on this, I am what I would call an anti-foundationalist. That's really more of my approach. Golly. That's really my approach. Foundationalism is a Cartesian concept. Now I'm going to come back over here. Foundationalism really starts with Descartes when he says, I think, therefore I am. The idea is that you can come to some indubitable foundation for all knowledge. All knowledge can be derived from one indubitable foundation, okay? To me, it starts with Descartes. He chose the mind as his foundation, hence rationalism. I feel like Christians, Protestant Christians especially, have done the exact same thing, but instead of I think, therefore I am, they say Bible, therefore I am. And so I have no problem with the Bible. I believe in all the standard sola scriptura doctrines of the Bible, right? Infallible, inerrant in its original autographs, inspired, yada, yada, yada. My problem is with utilizing a foundationalist structure in terms of your epistemology. So I love the Bible. Foundationalism is false. It's not true. There are major problems with it. And so evangelical Protestants are foundationalists. They're doing okay because they got the Bible, which is super important, but they still have a foundationalist epistemology, which is problematic. And if you read Alistair McGrath's Scientific Theology, which I've only read the preface thus far, but he talks about this explicitly, right? He says, the themes of this second volume are to be set against the backdrop of radical changes in Western philosophy and theology resulting from the collapse of the Enlightenment project and the consequent fragmentation of intellectual discourse. This development has a double significance for a scientific theology, in that its formulation is rendered both more urgent and more problematic. The growing awareness of the serious flaws of both foundationalism and the cognate notion of a universal rationality has had an impact upon Western thought comparable to the revolution which swept through the physical sciences through the failure of the Michelson-Morley experiment to detect the motion of the ether. And he goes on, etc. He says a little bit later, when he discovered critical realism, he said it was essentially like a light bulb moment for him. Right. So what form of realism is most appropriate to the task of scientific theology? One of the most distinctive features of this volume is its application of the critical realism found in the writings of Roy Bhaskar in about the 70s to scientific theology. Readers may be interested to know how this engagement came about. I'd been long dissatisfied with certain realist accounts of pure objectivity, which seem to fail to take account of either the observer's involvement in the process of knowing or the observer's location within history, and hence at least partial conditioning by the contingencies and particularities of that location. By 1990, I had become quite clear that the Kantian tradition was seriously deficient in this respect. The increasing emphasis being placed on the role of communities and traditions seemed to me to offer at least some means of resolving this difficulty, not least through its explicit recognition of historically situated character of reflection. The writings of Alistair McIntyre and others seem to provide an important corrective to the manifest failure of the Kantian tradition to deal with this issue. However, it was not clear to me how this analysis could be extended to include engagement with the issues of realism in the natural sciences and theology. Indeed, some of the theological schools to embrace the idea of tradition-mediated rationality appeared to associate, if anything, with non-realist approaches to theology. He goes on and on and on. And then he essentially says, once he discovered critical realism, it was like a light bulb moment for him. My breakthrough came in late 1998 when I came across the third edition of Roy Bhaskar's The Possibility of Naturalism. By the time I finished reading and annotating this work, I knew I had found a form of critical realism that took the social location of the observer seriously. The next year was taken up with a sustained engagement with Bhaskar's specific approach to critical realism, which has been developed and amplified in this work, especially in the 10th chapter. It is perhaps the most significant aspect of this volume, and it is likely that my exploration of its potential for Christian theology will need to be developed further and more critically by others. Oh, I answer the call, Mr. McGrath. I answer the call. Come on. Right? So there you go. Now, I want to look at, let's bring up Meek. And I, as far as I can tell thus far in my engagement with Meek, she does not look like she is aware at all of critical realism. But I might be wrong. Let me pull up. I don't have all of Meek's works in Logos. I have one in Kindle, her most important work, I think. Giovanno says, what do you believe about the creation of the world report in the Bible? Giovanno, my stance is generally a young earth stance. I haven't seen a need to leave that stance. To me, this is like a tertiary or quaternary issue. So if somebody were to come to me and they were like, oh, I'm a Christian, but I'm old earth, that's fine. I don't have a big problem with that. But I've been a young earther for a long time, and I have not seen a need yet to abandon that position, right? Cal Magic, I'm working through Volume 1 as it appears to be foundational Volume 2 as McGrath outlined all 3 volumes. Well, let me know. I have all 3 volumes, but I was planning on jumping into Volume 2 by itself. So if you get through Volume 1 and you think it's really important and critical, let me know, and I will lean in. All the brightness from my Kindle app, and I will bring up Meek over here. Loving to Know, I think, is Meek's major work on the topic. Let me bring this up over here, and then I will see if we can answer your question. All right, let's try Bhaskar. 0 matches. Let's try Critical Realism. 6 matches. A popular realist stance is known as critical realism, in the wake of Immanuel Kant's famous critiques, which brought to the fore the first time the immense active contribution the mind makes to knowledge. It was generally understood that it was no longer appropriate for anyone to be a direct or naive realist. Such an unfortunate person would think that he or she passively perceive things in the world the way those things really are. This is the critical half of critical realism, as opposed to naive realism. What's up, William Deerfield? Good to see you. Welcome. Thanks for swinging by. A critical realism, in contrast, is more sophisticated and virtuous. It is implied, naming the contributions of the human mind, of the knower's hermeneutic bent, blah, 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 blah. She leans heavily on Polanyi, and Polanyi, in his book Personal Knowledge, certainly has some, how can I put it? Certainly has an affinity with critical realism, but they're not the same. Polanyian epistemology has shown the way to be realists, having creatively reoriented the dichotomous default that opposes knowledge and belief, mind and body, etc. And also because of that creative reorientation, it is possible to take a stand that need not share the negative outlook of critical realism either. So I guess I skipped a couple important sentences. Of the knower's hermeneutic bent, of social setting, and what have you, and issuing regular and extensive qualifications concerning what we can't really know of what reality is in itself. This is greatly oversimplified caricature, but not an unfair one. I do not mean to say that no good comes from critical realist studies. However, the emphasis remains on what keeps you from knowing the world and what you need to try to diminish to know in order to know it better. And so, yeah, she's basically like, Polanyi has all our answers. And I read Personal Knowledge, and I do not believe that Polanyi has all of our answers. Marjorie Green, who shares Polanyi's fundamental epistemic commitments, speaks of the primacy of the real. She says that she toyed with calling herself a naive realist so that so deemed unfortunate term in her Polanyian rejection of the modernist legacy that drives critical realism. A colleague counseled her that this would be unadvisable, and so she settles for the phrase, the primacy of the real. The term aptly expresses the realism of covenant epistemology. It suggests the real, not a disembodied mind knower, is in the driver's seat. In studied contrast to critical realism, I want to propose covenant realism. Covenant realism, I believe, grows out of a Polanyian epistemology, hand in hand with covenant epistemology. Covenant realism consists of the following theses. In our knowing, we accept the real. In fact, the real has transformative primacy in our knowing. Our knowing relationship with the real displays covenantal features, which by definition pertain to the interpersonal relationship. Thus, good knowing practices involve covenantally interpersonal excellence. Also, because knowing is covenantal, humans' epistemic relationship with the real is in an important sense as prescriptive as it is descriptive, and about mutual transformation rather than exclusively about information collecting. The goal of human exchange with the world is not exhaustive certainty, but dynamic, mutually healing communion. And finally, reality itself is such that it responds favorably to the covenantally appropriate overtures. The real is metonymiously personal. So I like a lot of that, but you can see she tries to distance herself from critical realism. The relative superiority of covenant realism to critical realism is important to grasp. Reality responds better and more transformatively not to criticism, but to covenant faithfulness. So this feels semantic to me. The critical portion of critical realism just grants that you as a knower, your knowledge of the world is mediated through your fallen human nature, right? To me, that's the critical half of critical realism. It's not about criticism per se. So that feels like a semantic issue to me, but yeah. One other work I might commend to you, Cal Magic. Lonergan on Insight. This is a massive book, 700 pages. I'm only 70 pages in, okay? But he kind of talks about what it takes to gain insight, and it's very similar to Polanyi's Personal Knowledge. You might find that helpful if you're interested in the epistemological direction that I've been heading myself. Good questions, Cal Magic. This is not what I thought I'd be talking about today, but I am glad to be talking about it. All right, let's continue. I have to leave, guys, in 10 minutes at the absolute latest, probably a little bit earlier. Author again of Collected Works, Lonergan, Bernard Lonergan. He was a Roman Catholic. You really only need volume 3, Insight. He also has interesting works on theological method, but I'm not to those ones yet. All right. Queer ideology is similar, denying as it does the stability of traditional categories of male and female in favor of a fluid and ever-changing range of multiple sexual identities. Nothing reveals the problem more dramatically than personal testimony. Take, for example, the following words of a lesbian living with a partner who transitioned from female to male. When my partner began his gender transition, my lesbian identity had been central to my life and my sense of self for well over a decade. I didn't know what his transition made me. Some people told me I was obviously still a lesbian, but it wasn't just as obvious to others that I was now straight or bisexual. It wasn't obvious to me at all, and I struggled with it for a long time. Now, I've been the partner of a trans man for as long as I was a lesbian, and I've gotten comfortable just not having a name for what I think I am. I think of myself as part of the family of queer and trans people. This idea of struggling with this, right? Very interesting. This woman's situation is a painful example of the confusion that fluid gender identities and trans ideology leave in their wake. When her female partner transitions to being trans male, she still feels that she is a lesbian sexually attracted to other women, but for her to assert this is to deny her partner's claim to be a man. However, if she affirms her partner's maleness, she must now deny her own identity as a lesbian. In the end, she settles for being queer, a conveniently fluid and rather vague term that avoids the problems created by trying to think in binary terms about transgenderism. Yeah, this is very interesting. Not all homosexuals are willing to be as accommodating as this woman. Andrew Sullivan, a gay man and an exceptionally sharp-witted and insightful journalist, made the following comment in New York Magazine in February 2019. It is not transphobic for a gay man not to be attracted to a trans man. It is close to definitional. The core of the traditional gay claim is that there is indeed a very big difference between male and female, that the differences matters, and without it, homosexuality would make no sense at all. If it's all free and fluid, non-binary choice of gender and sexual partners, a choice to have sex exclusively with the same sex would not be an expression of our identity, but a form of sexist bigotry. Blah. I struggled through that one, guys. Sorry. Interesting. Yeah, I think what Trueman is pointing out here is becoming increasingly clear in our day and age. And again, I can't help but think of J.K. Rowling and her strong anti-trans stance. Sullivan is far from a lone voice in this. In February 2021, Brian Quinn, who is co-owner of Camp Boomerang RV Park and Campground in Orleans, Michigan, found himself at the center of a storm. The campground is for gay men, and Quinn posted on Facebook that he would not be welcoming biological females onto the site, no matter how they identified in terms of gender. In short, trans men who were sexually attracted to men, biological and trans, were not welcome. This post earned him a storm of criticism for his transphobic policies. Other gay men have faced similar criticism for saying that, as gay, they do not find trans men to be sexually attractive. The destabilization of gender categories that trans ideology and queer theory demand stands in opposition to any category built on biological sex binary, straight, gay, or lesbian. In short, anyone who believes that the sex binary is important is vulnerable to accusations of transphobia. I think that's a really insightful point. And this is a really interesting story. Ronnie, hello. Welcome. Ronnie says, thank you for all you do, Pastor Tanner. My studies and use of Logos have increased dramatically since listening to you. Well, thank you, Ronnie. I appreciate that. You're awesome. Thanks for swinging by and giving me some encouragement. I know I haven't recorded some videos for some time. It's not going to be forever, right? But I'm tied up with other things at the moment. So I'm so glad my backlog content, though, has absolutely helped you, Ronnie. That's great. Let me know if there's anything I can do for you. All right, guys, I'm going to have to go here in a few minutes. Let's see how long this section is. Yeah, this section's too long. I got to go. I have a meeting in 9 minutes at the church. Luckily, I live close to the church, but I got to go. Like I said, guys, I wasn't sure if I was going to stream today. Only a short stream, but I appreciate your guys' time. And yeah, we made a little bit of progress in this one. I am putting together a lesson for Strange New World for my church tomorrow. If you're interested, head over to our church channel. And that's if you just type FBC Leadville into the chat, or not the chat, the search, you'll find our church channel, and you can listen to me teach on this subject tomorrow evening. Giovanni, see you. I will see you as well. Thank you so much. Appreciate you all so much for joining us for 40 minutes. That was it, just a 40-minute stream, but you guys are awesome. I hope you have a great day, a great rest of your week, and we'll catch you guys again real soon. Take care. God bless. Bye.